This is just a quick video to answer a question about how to keep the yarn from twisting when working stranded color work. The question was specific to someone who holds both yarns in their right hand, which I do. I'm going to say up front that probably the way I hold my yarn in my right hand is cringeworthy to most people who are professional, because I don't wrap yarn around any of my fingers or anything like that. So I'm not necessarily showing this for the technique of how to hold the yarn, but rather just how to avoid the yarn twisting. So when you're working the project, when you're working with two colors and you're doing stranded color work, the yarn should never, like the two different colors should never actually cross each other, with the exception of here at the edge, where you're told to, if you're told to catch your yarn at the edge of the project, that is the only time that the yarn truly actually crosses one color over the other. And so I always do mine, I do my catch at the beginning. And what I do is I usually I bring the dark color over the light color to make that first purl stitch. So when I do that, yes, the yarn does end up twisted. So there's two ways to handle this. You could just take the ball and move it, which, sorry, I'm kind of on a slope here. So that gets the yarns back in the correct order. So you always want your dark yarn or your dominant color to be on your left and your light yarn to be to your right. And then as you're working across, you're not ever bringing the yarn over the two yarns should not actually ever cross each other. One of them is being worked higher than the other. So in this instance, let me see where I am in this pattern here. So when I'm working with the dark yarn, it's always going to come up. Sorry, make sure that's in frame. It's always going to come up underneath the light color and to the left to make the stitch. And then it's going to go back underneath. So it's not going to come over the yarn. It's just making the stitch and then dropping back down. And so you're constantly working the yarn, the light colored yarn, over the top, and then just bringing that dark color. Sorry, let me get my yarns actually the way I hold them. Make sure I'm back in the frame. So you're making that stitch, making the stitch with the dark color, and then you're just bringing it back into its original position. So my finger basically just swings the yarn up over to make that stitch, and then I come back with the light colored yarn that's always coming over the top of the dark color. So let's see, that's that. So my light is always coming over the top of the dark. And when I make a dark stitch, it's just coming from underneath and to the left to make that stitch. So if you were holding one yarn in each hand, you would definitely want to hold your dark color or your dominant color in your left hand. But it's the same technique. You're always bringing the light color from above and the right, and the dark color is always coming from below and the left to make the stitch. And so when you're doing it consistently that way, the yarns never cross each other. And so they shouldn't be twisted at all when you get to the end of a row, because you're keeping them in the same order each time. And then I make my purl stitch. So I'll show you on the wrong side of the fabric when you're when you're just purling. It's the same technique. You're always holding the colors on their exclusive sides. So when I turn my yarn here, or turn my work, I still have my light color on the right, my dark color on the left. And again, there is going to be just quickly they're going to cross at the beginning, because that's where I'm going to catch the dark color in that, before I make that purl stitch. Whoops. Get the edge out of the way here. Sorry, it's really hard to watch what I'm doing and actually make sure I'm staying in frame, so I apologize if I slip out of frame here briefly. Trying to keep an eye on it. So again, I do need my dark color to come over my light color to catch it at this edge. And so what I can do is I can bring the entire ball, making sure it doesn't go through my cable, because that would be bad. I can bring the entire ball over and just put it back in its same place, and then make that first stitch. And then as you're working across the purl side, and now I am on a, sorry, just making sure where I am in the pattern so I don't get lost here. You're still bringing, sorry, my yarn got stuck under the ball here. So again, my yarns are still in the correct order, okay? I've still got my dark yarn on the left side and my light yarn on the right side. And there's not actually a twist here. They're just kind of hanging up on each other a little bit because I'm working, bringing the yarn around the edge of the project. But every time I make that dark stitch, it's coming up from underneath to make the stitch. And then that light yarn is still just over the rest of the project. Okay, so I'm always just bringing the dark yarn from underneath to the left to make the stitch and then dropping it back down. So when I first started doing stranded knitting, I was actually just using one, actually just working with one color at a time. Like I would have both yarns here, but I would only pick up and work one color at a time. And if you're doing that, all you need to do is just make sure that you're bringing the dark yarn up from underneath to make the stitch and then dropping it back down and bringing the light yarn over the top to make those stitches. So as long as you're not changing the position that you're bringing the yarn from, the dark yarn's just kind of gliding along here below the light yarn, and then it comes up every once in a while to make a stitch, but it's not ever coming over the light yarn. It's not ever changing positions with the light yarn. So you just want to make sure that you're not bringing, for instance, you're not bringing the dark yarn over from the right across the top. You always want to make sure it's coming from underneath and to the left of the light colored yarn. And if you do that consistently, your yarns will never get twisted. The only place they will actually twist is just that stitch at the beginning or at the end of the row where you need to catch the dark color with the light color. And other than that, you should be on track to never have your yarns twisting up as you're working. And again, if you decide to use one color in your left hand and one in your right, you just want to make sure that the left yarn is your dark yarn. Your dominant color needs to be the one that's in your left hand because that's the position that yarn always needs to come from. So I hope that's helpful. I know, like I said, I'm really sorry if I go out of frame. It's really hard to watch the camera and my knitting to make sure I'm staying in frame. But I hope that helps. Just your yarn should always be able to stay in the same position, and with the exception of that first stitch at the edge, where you have to cross the yarn to catch it, there shouldn't be any problem with the yarns actually getting tangled. Hope that helps.